rails like silver lace, and Cordelia Hawthorne could see her breath in the crisp October air as she approached the old barn. What she witnessed there defied every piece of conventional wisdom she'd ever learned about horses. In the doorless stall, at the far end, a magnificent bay stallion stood perfectly still, his dark coat gleaming in the early sunlight streaming through the weathered slats. The horse had no halter, no rope, no barrier of any kind preventing his escape, yet there he remained, as if an invisible force held him in place. Cordelia had heard whispers about this phenomenon in the farming community for months, but seeing it with her own eyes left her speechless. The stallion's name was Raven's Thunder, and according to local legend, he had never once attempted to leave his doorless sanctuary. Behind her, the screen door of the farmhouse creaked open, and Jeremiah Driftwood emerged with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. His weathered face bore the lines of 73 years, but his eyes held the clarity of someone who had witnessed miracles and accepted them as part of life's grand tapestry. "You're wondering how it's possible," Jeremiah said, his voice carrying the gravelly warmth of someone who had spent decades talking to both horses and humans with equal respect. He handed Cordelia a mug, the ceramic warm against her cold fingers. "It shouldn't be possible," she replied, watching as Raven's Thunder turned his magnificent head toward them, his dark eyes holding an intelligence that seemed almost human. "Horses are flight animals. Every instinct they have tells them to run when they feel threatened or uncertain. But this one chooses to stay," Jeremiah finished. "Been doing it for 3 years now, ever since I lost my wife, Magnolia. She was the one who first suggested removing the doors from all the stalls. Said the horses would be happier if they knew they could leave whenever they wanted." Cordelia studied the other stalls in the barn. Sure enough, not one of them had doors. 3 other horses wandered freely in and out, grazing in the pasture or returning to their stalls at will. But Raven's Thunder remained in his chosen spot, as if he were a guardian rather than a captive. "The neighbors think you're crazy," Cordelia said, though there was no judgment in her voice. She had come here as a reporter for the Regional Agricultural Review, expecting to write a quirky human interest piece about an eccentric old farmer. Instead, she found herself confronting something that challenged everything she thought she knew about the relationship between humans and animals. Jeremiah chuckled, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Crazy is just another word for trying something different. Magnolia used to say that trust isn't something you can force, it's something you have to earn every single day." She applied that philosophy to everything, our marriage, our children, and especially our animals. As if summoned by the mention of trust, Raven's Thunder stepped forward to the edge of his stall, his hooves making soft sounds against the packed earth. He stretched his neck toward Jeremiah, and the old farmer reached out to stroke the horse's muzzle with a gentleness that spoke of years of mutual respect. "Want to know the real secret?" Jeremiah asked, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "It's not about the doors at all." Cordelia leaned forward, her journalist's instincts fully engaged. "Then what is it about?" Jeremiah smiled and walked toward Raven's Thunder, his movements slow and deliberate. The horse watched him approach with an alertness that suggested deep familiarity rather than wariness. "It's about listening," he said simply. "Most folks think communication with animals is about teaching them to understand us. But Magnolia figured out it was the other way around. We had to learn to understand them." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age and frequent handling. "This belonged to my wife. She spent 40 years documenting every interaction she had with every animal on this farm, not just what she did, but what they did in response. She called it the language of understanding." Cordelia set down her coffee mug and accepted the journal with reverence. The pages were filled with Magnolia's careful handwriting, detailed observations about animal behavior, weather patterns, and the subtle connections between them. One entry caught her attention. Raven's Thunder chose the east stall today. Storm coming from the west. He always knows before the weather service does. She discovered that animals don't just react to our emotions, Jeremiah continued, gently stroking Raven's Thunder's neck. They anticipate them. They read our intentions before we're even fully aware of them ourselves. Once she started paying attention to their communications, everything changed. The horse nickered softly, and Jeremiah nodded as if he had understood every nuance of the sound. "He's telling me about the mare in the next county. She's in foal, and she's having complications. He wants me to go check on her." Cordelia looked skeptical. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because 3 years ago, when Magnolia was dying, Raven's Thunder started doing something extraordinary. He began acting as a messenger between our farm and others in the region. Somehow, he could sense when animals elsewhere were in distress. He would pace, whinny in specific patterns, and position himself in ways that indicated direction and urgency." The old farmer walked to a wooden board hanging inside the barn, covered with a detailed map of the surrounding area. Colored pins marked various locations, and Cordelia realized she was looking at a sophisticated communication system that spanned dozens of farms across 3 counties. "At first, I thought it was coincidence," Jeremiah admitted, "but then I started keeping track, just like Magnolia had taught me. Every time Raven's Thunder exhibited certain behaviors, I would call the farm in the direction he indicated. Without fail, they needed help with something: a sick animal, a difficult birth, sometimes even a lost pet." Cordelia studied the map, her mind racing. "You're telling me this horse has created some kind of animal communication network?" "Not created," Jeremiah corrected, "tapped into." Magnolia believed animals have always communicated across distances in ways we don't understand. She thought Raven's Thunder was just naturally gifted at interpreting and translating those signals as if to demonstrate. Raven's Thunder stepped out of his stall and walked to the barn's eastern entrance. He stood there for a moment, his ears pricked forward, his entire body alert. Then he returned to his stall and began a series of soft whinnies, each one distinct in pitch and duration. Jeremiah pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number. "Hello, Rosemary, it's Jeremiah. How's your mare doing today?" He listened for a moment, then nodded gravely. "I'll be right over." He hung up and looked at Cordelia with eyes that held both wonder and sadness. "She's been in labor for 6 hours. The vet can't make it until tomorrow because of the storm moving in." Raven's Thunder knew the horse had returned to his doorless stall, but his posture indicated he was ready to leave at a moment's notice. Cordelia realized that his choice to stay wasn't about confinement. It was about being available when needed. He had transformed his stall into a communication center, a place where he could best serve his community. The doors would interfere with his work, she said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Exactly," Jeremiah replied. "How can you answer a call for help if you're locked behind a door?" The drive to the Morrison farm took 20 minutes through winding country roads, lined with oak trees shedding their autumn leaves. Cordelia sat in the passenger seat of Jeremiah's weathered pickup truck, watching the landscape blur past while her mind struggled to process what she was witnessing. In the back of the truck, Raven's Thunder stood calmly in a specially designed trailer with no back gate, another testament to the trust between horse and human. "How long has he been doing this?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the rumble of the engine. "The communication started about 6 months before Magnolia passed," Jeremiah replied, his hands steady on the wheel despite the emotional weight of the memory. "She was bedridden by then, but she insisted on having her bed moved to the window overlooking the barn. She wanted to watch him, to document what he was doing. She said he was preparing for something important." They arrived at the Morrison farm to find Rosemary Morrison pacing anxiously in front of a small stable. She was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and worry lines etched deep around her eyes. When she saw Jeremiah's truck, relief flooded her features. "Thank God you're here," she called out. "Luna's been struggling since before dawn. I've tried everything I know, but she's just not progressing." Jeremiah lowered the trailer ramp, and Raven's Thunder stepped out with purpose. Instead of following the humans into the stable, he positioned himself outside the stall where the mare was laboring. He stood perfectly still, his head lowered, his breathing synchronized with some rhythm only he could hear. Inside the stall, Luna was indeed in distress. The chestnut mare was lying on her side, her breathing labored, her eyes wide with pain and fear. Cordelia had never witnessed a horse birth before, but even she could see that something was wrong. "Her foal is positioned incorrectly," Jeremiah said after a careful examination. "We need to help her, but she's too frightened to let us get close enough." That's when Raven's thunder began to communicate. His vocalizations were unlike anything Cordelia had heard before, a series of low, rhythmic sounds that seemed to carry across the stable. Like a lullaby, Luna's ears turned toward him, and gradually, her breathing began to slow. "He's calming her," Rosemary whispered in amazement. "I've never seen anything like it." Jeremiah nodded, his movements becoming more confident as Luna relaxed. "Magnolia always said that animals understand each other's pain better than we do. They don't just offer comfort, they offer presence. They show up when it matters most." Over. The next hour, Cordelia watched something extraordinary unfold. Raven's thunder maintained his position outside the stall, his vocalizations adapting to Luna's needs. When she needed encouragement, his sounds became more urgent. When she needed comfort, they became softer. And when the critical moment arrived for Jeremiah to assist with the birth, Raven's thunder's communication seemed to give Luna the courage she needed to accept help. The foal was born healthy, a beautiful bay colt who stood on shaky legs within minutes of his arrival. Luna immediately began grooming her baby. Her crisis transformed into triumph. Raven's thunder nickered once, softly, and then fell silent. "Is it always like this?" Cordelia asked, watching the stallion load himself back into the trailer without any coaxing. "Every time," Jeremiah replied. "He knows when his work is done, and he knows when he's needed elsewhere." As they drove back to the Driftwood farm, Cordelia found herself thinking about the nature of service. Raven's thunder had chosen to remain in his doorless stall, not because he was trapped, but because he had found his purpose. He had transformed what others might see as confinement into a headquarters for compassion. Magnolia used to say that true freedom isn't about having no responsibilities, Jeremiah said. As if reading her thoughts, it's about choosing the responsibilities that matter most to you. The horse stood quietly in his trailer, his mission accomplished, ready to return to his post where he could listen for the next call for help. Cordelia realized that she was witnessing something profound. A being who had discovered that the greatest liberty came not from running away, but from choosing to stay and serve. When they arrived back at the farm, Raven's thunder walked directly to his stall and resumed his vigil. The other horses in the barn seemed to understand his role. They moved around him with a respect that bordered on reverence. "He carries the weight of the entire community," Cordelia observed, "and he carries it gladly." Jeremiah replied, "That's what makes him extraordinary." 3 days later, Cordelia found herself returning to the Driftwood farm, her article deadline approaching, but her understanding of the story still evolving. She had spent the previous evening reading through more of Magnolia's journals, discovering a depth of observation, an insight that challenged everything she thought she knew about animal intelligence and communication. The journals revealed that Raven's thunder wasn't the only animal in the network. There were others, a border collie named Pippin who lived on the Jenkins farm and could sense when elderly neighbors were having health crises. A barn owl called Wistba who served as an early warning system for approaching storms, and a draft horse named Goliath who had an uncanny ability to locate lost children in the surrounding woods. Magnolia called them the guardians, Jeremiah explained as they sat in his kitchen, surrounded by decades of documentation. She believed that certain animals are born with enhanced sensitivity to the interconnected web of life. They don't just live in their environment, they serve as its nervous system. Cordelia looked up from the journal she was studying. Did she ever figure out how it works? She had theories, Jeremiah said, pouring fresh coffee into their mugs. She thought it might be related to electromagnetic fields, or maybe infrasound low frequency vibrations that humans can't detect but animals can. But ultimately, she decided the mechanism was less important than the reality. Through the kitchen window, they could see Raven's thunder in his stall, his posture alert despite the early hour. As Cordelia watched, the horse's behavior began to change. His ears swiveled toward the north, his nostrils flared slightly, and he began shifting his weight from one hoof to another. "He's receiving something," Jeremiah said, recognizing the signs immediately. He stood and walked to the barn, with Cordelia following close behind. Raven's Thunder was now pacing within his stall, his movements precise and purposeful. He would walk to the northern edge, pause, then return to the center before repeating. The pattern, each circuit seemed to carry a message, a translation of signals that existed beyond human perception. "The Carmichael farm," Jeremiah said after watching the pattern for several minutes. "Something's wrong with their livestock." He reached for his phone, but before he could dial, it rang. The caller ID showed Carmichael Farm. "Jeremiah, thank God you're awake," came the voice of Dalton Carmichael, strained with worry. "We've got a situation here. Half our cattle are acting strange, restless, won't eat, and our dogs are howling like they're in pain. Can you come take a look?" After hanging up, Jeremiah and Cordelia prepared to leave for the Carmichael farm. But this time, Raven's Thunder's behavior indicated something different. Instead of loading into the trailer, he remained in his stall, his attention focused on the other horses in the barn. "He's not coming with us," Cordelia observed. "No," Jeremiah agreed. "He's coordinating. Watch." Over the next few minutes, they witnessed something remarkable. Raven's Thunder began a series of vocalizations that seemed to activate the other horses. Each one responded differently, some moving to specific positions in the barn, others heading out to the pasture. It was like watching a conductor organize an orchestra. "He's sending them out," Jeremiah explained. "Each one has a different role to play." As they drove to the Carmichael farm, Jeremiah explained that Magnolia had documented this phenomenon as well. In times of widespread crisis, Raven's Thunder would coordinate multiple animals across several farms, creating a living network of support and communication. They arrived at the Carmichael farm to find chaos. The cattle were indeed restless, bunched together in corners of their pasture, their eyes wide with an anxiety that had no apparent source. The farm dogs were pacing and whining, unable to settle despite their owners' attempts to calm them. But scattered throughout the property were horses from other farms' animals that had arrived seemingly on their own, taking positions around the perimeter of the Carmichael land. Cordelia recognized the pattern from Magnolia's journals. They were creating a protective circle, a living barrier against whatever was disturbing the local animal population. "Gas leak," Jeremiah said suddenly, his expression grave. "The animals are sensing a natural gas leak. That's why they're all so agitated." Within an hour, the gas company had arrived and confirmed Jeremiah's assessment. A major pipeline rupture had occurred 2 miles underground, releasing dangerous levels of methane into the soil. The leak was too deep for humans to detect without specialized equipment, but the animals had sensed it immediately if we hadn't acted when we did. The gas company supervisor told them this could have been catastrophic. The concentration was building toward an explosion. As the emergency crews worked to contain the leak, Cordelia watched the horses gradually return to their home farms. Their mission was complete, the danger neutralized. They had served as an early warning system that had quite literally saved lives. "This is bigger than one horse in a doorless stall," she said to Jeremiah as they drove home. "Much bigger," he agreed. Magnolia used to say that Raven's Thunder was just the beginning. She believed that if more people learned to listen to their animals, to trust their instincts and honor their communications, we could create a world where disasters were prevented rather than simply responded to. A week later, Cordelia's article had been published and was gaining national attention. The regional agricultural review's servers crashed twice from the overwhelming response, and major news networks were calling to request interviews. But Cordelia found herself less interested in the media attention than in the deeper implications of what she had witnessed. She had returned to the Driftwood farm to conduct a follow-up interview, but more importantly, to understand how this extraordinary relationship between Jeremiah and Raven's Thunder had developed. The old farmer was sitting on his porch, whittling a piece of cedar wood, when she arrived. "Magnolia would have been amazed by all this fuss," he said, gesturing to the stack of newspapers on the porch table. "She always said the animals were just waiting for us to pay attention." Cordelia settled into the rocking chair beside him, noting how peaceful the farm seemed despite the recent media attention. Raven's Thunder was in his stall, as always, but today his posture seemed more relaxed, as if the immediate crisis had passed. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "In all the research I've done, following up on your story, I keep coming back to the same question. Why here? Why this farm? This horse, this particular relationship?" Jeremiah smiled, his knife continuing its steady work on the cedar. "Magnolia asked me the same thing, near the end. She was worried about what would happen to the network after she was gone. She'd spent so much time documenting everything, teaching me to recognize the signs. But she wondered if it was enough." He paused in his whittling and looked out toward the barn. "The night before she died, she told me something I'll never forget. She said, 'Jeremiah, the animals don't need us to understand them perfectly. They just need us to try. They need us to show up with open hearts and minds, ready to learn instead of ready to control.'" Cordelia felt a chill run down her spine. What did she mean? She meant that the relationship between humans and animals has always been about mutual respect, but somewhere along the way, we forgot that. We started thinking of them as property, as resources to be managed rather than partners to be trusted. The doorless stalls, the network of communication, all of it comes from remembering that partnership, as if summoned by their conversation. Raven's Thunder stepped out of his stall and walked toward them. He moved with the quiet confidence of a being who knew his worth and his purpose. When he reached the porch, he extended his neck toward Cordelia, his breath warm against her outstretched hand. "He's accepting you," Jeremiah said softly. "That's not something he does lightly." Cordelia felt tears prick her eyes as she stroked the horse's muzzle. There was something profound in the contact, a sense of connection that transcended species boundaries. She understood, in that moment, what Magnolia had discovered, that communication wasn't about words or even sounds, but about presence, attention, and respect. "The other farms are starting to experiment," Jeremiah continued, removing doors from stalls, paying closer attention to their animals' behavior, documenting patterns. "Your article has given people permission to try something different." Over the following hour, Cordelia learned that the network was expanding. Farmers from 6 states had contacted Jeremiah, sharing their own observations about animal behavior and asking for guidance on how to develop deeper relationships with their livestock. Some had reported their own guardian animals, creatures that seemed to serve as early warning systems for their communities. "Dr. Marlo Hutchinson from the University of Kentucky called yesterday," Jeremiah said. "He wants to study the network, document it scientifically. He thinks it could revolutionize how we understand animal intelligence and communication." Cordelia was intrigued. "What did you tell him?" "I told him he was welcome to observe, as long as he remembered that the animal's well-being comes first. Science can help us understand what's happening, but it can't replace the relationship itself." As the afternoon wore on, Cordelia found herself thinking about the broader implications of what she had witnessed. In a world increasingly dominated by technology and digital communication, there was something both ancient and revolutionary about returning to the fundamental relationship between humans and animals. Magnolia used to say that animals are teachers, Jeremiah said as they prepared to head back to the barn. "They show us how to live in harmony with our environment, how to communicate without words, how to serve something larger than ourselves." Raven's Thunder isn't just a horse in a doorless stall, he's a reminder of what we're capable of when we choose trust over control. The horse had returned to his stall, but his presence continued to fill the barn with a sense of purpose and possibility. Watching him, Cordelia realized that her story was far from over. The doorless stall was just the beginning of a much larger narrative about connection, service, and the wisdom that comes from truly listening to the world around us. 6 months later, Cordelia stood once again in the driftwood barn, but this time she wasn't alone. Dr. Marlo Hutchinson from the University of Kentucky was there, along with veterinarians, animal behaviorists, and farmers from across the region. They had come to witness something extraordinary, the first formal gathering of what was now being called the Guardian Network. The barn had been transformed into a kind of amphitheater, with bales of hay ranged in a semicircle round Raven's Thunder's stall. The horse stood in his doorless sanctuary, his presence commanding the attention of everyone present. But he wasn't alone. Other guardian animals had arrived with their human partners. creating a living testament to the power of interspecies cooperation. When Magnolia first started documenting animal communication, Jeremiah addressed the gathering. She never imagined it would lead to this. She was just a farm wife who believed in listening to her animals, but she discovered something that I think we all need to remember. Wisdom doesn't require credentials or degrees. It requires attention, respect, and the humility to learn from those who are different from us. Dr. Hutchinson stepped forward, his initial skepticism having transformed into genuine wonder over the months of observation. We've documented over 300 instances of predictive behavior across the network, he reported. Weather pattern predictions, early disease detection, location of missing persons or animals, and even seismic activity awareness. The accuracy rate is extraordinary, but the true revelation came when Cordelia shared what she had learned. From her continued investigation, the network isn't just about emergency response. She said, it's about creating a different kind of relationship with the land, with our communities, and with each other. The farmers who have joined the network report stronger connections, not just with their animals, but with their neighbors, their environment, and their own sense of purpose. Rosemary Morrison stood up, her mare Luna and the foal that had been born that difficult night standing nearby. Before I met Jeremiah and Raven's Thunder, I thought farming was about controlling nature. Now I understand it's about partnering with it. Luna hasn't just become a better mother, she's become a teacher. She's shown me how to read the signs I was missing, how to anticipate problems before they become crises. One by one, other farmers shared their stories. The Jenkins family told how their border collie Pippin had helped them create a neighborhood watch system that had reduced crime by 60%. The Carmichael farm had become a model for sustainable agriculture, with their animals serving as living monitors of soil health and environmental conditions. But perhaps the most moving testimony came from a young girl named Clarity Pemberton, whose family had recently joined the network. She stood beside a gentle draft horse named Anchor, her small hand resting on his massive shoulder. My grandpa always said animals were just dumb beasts, she said, her voice clear and confident. But Anchor taught me that being quiet doesn't mean being stupid. He knows things. He feels things. And when I listen to him, really listen, I learned things about myself that I never knew before. As the gathering continued, Cordelia found herself thinking about the ripple effects of one old farmer's decision to trust his animals. The network had grown beyond anyone's expectations, creating connections that transcended traditional boundaries of species, profession, and geography. Dr. Hutchinson approached her during a break. Your article changed everything, he said. It gave people permission to trust their own observations, to value their animals' contributions in ways they never had before. We're seeing applications in therapy programs, disaster response, environmental monitoring, and even early childhood education. But the most profound change was happening right here, in the barn where it all began. As the afternoon light streamed through the weathered boards, Cordelia watched Raven's Thunder interact with the other guardian animals. There was a sense of recognition among them, a shared understanding of their role in the larger tapestry of life. Jeremiah appeared beside her, his eyes bright with satisfaction. Magnolia would be proud, he said simply. She always believed that one act of trust could change the world. She just never imagined it would happen this fast. As the gathering began to wind down, Cordelia realized that her role had evolved, too. She was no longer just a journalist documenting an unusual story. She had become a chronicler of a movement that was reshaping how humans and animals related to each other. The guardian animals began departing with their human partners, but Raven's Thunder remained in his doorless stall, his vigil continuing. He had become a symbol of something larger than himself. The power of choosing service over self-interest, connection over isolation, trust over control. He'll stay here as long as he's needed, Jeremiah said, reading her thoughts. But someday, when the network is strong enough, when enough people have learned to listen, he might choose to leave, and that will be okay too, because by then, we'll have learned the lesson he came to teach us. As Cordelia drove away from the farm that evening, she looked back to see Raven's Thunder silhouetted against the sunset. standing in his doorless stall not as a prisoner, but as a guardian of possibilities. The farmer's stall had no doors, but it had open pathways to understanding that would endure long after the last of the old boards had weathered away. The network would continue to grow, connecting hearts across species and communities across the globe. And at its center would always be the memory of a magnificent horse who chose to stay in an open stall, not because he couldn't leave, but because he understood that sometimes the greatest freedom comes from choosing to serve something greater than yourself. In the gathering twilight, the barn stood as a testament to the power of trust, the wisdom of listening, and the extraordinary things that become possible when we remove the doors that keep us apart and choose instead to remain present, available, and open to the endless possibilities of connection.